Something very creepy happened to me on Christmas. I had celebrated the holiday that morning with my family and went to see my parents on Christmas night as well. I had to go into work though to finish up a proposal I was working on for a new potential client. I obviously didn't want to go, but it had to be finished nonetheless. I worked in a building downtown that was fairly close to a few nightclubs and bars. My office is on the 23rd floor, and in my position, I have an office, but most of the floor is filled with cubicles. My office is in the very far corner next to my boss's, so to get to that area, you have to walk by all the cubicles in the center. I didn't get there too late, probably around 8 or 9 or so, but there was nobody else there. This was my second time going it alone. It was pretty peaceful actually. If I let my imagination run wild, however, I would get spooked quite easily. As I walked the path next to the cubicles, I was reminded of what I was currently missing at home while looking at all the Christmas lights strung up, decorating people's workspaces. There were no actual lights on, but it was lit up well enough by all these Christmas lights that I could still see. I reached my office and unlocked it. I walked inside but didn't close the door. My computer and desk faced away from my door, so I couldn't see anyone that approached my door. On work days, I always found this very annoying, as I never knew who would be knocking until I got up and opened the door to check. I sat down and began working as quickly as possible. I wanted to get home as soon as I can. After a while, I'd say about an hour into it, I heard the main entrance door close. I'd never heard it open, but when it closed, it made a distinct noise that was unmistakable. I wasn't too spooked at this point though. I was just curious as to who else was unlucky enough to have to come in and finish something with me. I got up from my desk and walked out onto the floor. I looked around, but I didn't see anybody there. I called out fairly loudly, "Hello?" Nobody responded at that moment though. I started to get paranoid and freaked out because I definitely just heard the entrance door close. Somebody was here. Either they'd left immediately or they were still in here with me hiding, not responding to what I was saying. I was just about to turn around and go back into the office and try to brush off what I heard when I saw a head stick up out of the cubicle on the opposite side of the floor. Whoever it was looking right at me. I could see it appeared to be a man, but I couldn't make out any details of his face. I thought it must be one of my coworkers messing with me, so I shouted over to him, "Hey, what a time to have to come in, huh?" I hoped whoever it was would stand up and laugh with me, but they didn't. The man didn't move at all. This scared the crap out of me, so I tried to make conversation again. "Hey, guy, you know I can see you, right?" He didn't move at all. I wasn't sure what to do now. I was scared shitless, so I felt through my pocket for my keys. They were still there. I started walking down the path toward the entrance door, the whole time keeping a firm eye on this guy. As I was walking, I think he was watching me go. I looked over to the entrance door for just a second. One damn second. When I looked back, the man was already gone. After seeing this, I thought, oh my god, is he moving over toward me? I jogged the rest of the way to the door and rushed through it. I jogged over to the elevator too and slammed that button down hard. I turned around quickly as I heard the entrance door slam closed. It made that same distinct noise as before. The elevator door thankfully opened right away and I went inside. I hit the first floor button and the door closed quickly. I didn't see the guy following me. I drove home and told my wife what happened. I also had to call my boss and tell him the reason for not finishing my proposal that night. Thankfully, he was fairly understanding. I went back 2 days later with everyone else. I never found out who that guy was or what that was all about. Nothing was stolen or tampered with to my knowledge, so what could he have been there for that night? Every August, the county I lived in would throw a huge fair. There were games, rides, shows, and food, all that good stuff. They'd come around for about 2 weeks. Then they would take it all down, and I'd have to wait an entire year for them to come around again. I want to say this happened in 2008 or so. I know I was around 7 at the time, just tall enough to ride something I had wanted to go on for a long time. I convinced my mom to let my cousin Jared and I ride it. Jared was about 2 years older than I was. My mom trusted us to be safe, so we ran off to ride the ride. After we did so, Jared had to use the bathroom real bad. The fair only had porta potties though, so I had to just wait outside for him to finish. And that's when this random man just walked right up to me. He told me that I had to go with him right now. When I asked him why, he said my parents had called on him to come collect me. I know I should have run away or called out to Jared or something, but this guy said he knew my parents. It's an obvious lie looking back. He didn't even mention their names, but I thought surely if he knew my parents, then he wasn't a stranger. This guy grabbed my hand and started to take me out to his car. Now, to get to the parking lot of this fair, you had to walk a fairly long time, probably about 10 minutes. It's a huge field where they had the fair set up. I asked him where we were going. He told me they said they were going to McDonald's to get some food. The closest McDonald's was about an hour away, and I had just eaten not long before. I said I wasn't hungry, and I wanted to go see my mom instead. I started to try and walk away, but he grabbed my arm and started dragging me towards his truck. I froze. I knew this was a bad guy now, but I was in some sort of state of shock. I can't even remember if I tried to move or scream. All that really came out though was a strangled whisper. I remember crying without making a sound. We were right next to his truck now, and he was trying to force me into the back seat. That's when this young couple happened to see him. They must have seen me panicking and crying because the girl ran right up to me and grabbed me. She started screaming. The guy came over too. The bad man was already in his truck though. He ran over the other guy's foot as he sped away. That young couple saved my life that day. I have no idea what that guy would have done to me if he got me to go to where he was actually heading. I know for sure it wasn't McDonald's though. The couple walked me to the entrance as an announcement was made saying there was a missing child. My mom and Jared arrived shortly after. They were both crying. I remember running up to her bursting into tears before whispering why she'd asked that man to take me. She said she didn't know who tried to take me. We hugged and left after. We didn't go back to the fair again that year, or at all the next year either. My mom was paranoid the guy would still be there looking for children. I got over this fairly quickly though, and went on with my life. I only really remembered this because my girlfriend wanted to go on that same ride last year. Halloween 2015. That Halloween night started with myself and my buddy getting ready and putting on our costumes at my buddy's house. For the sake of privacy, I'll refer to him as Brad. Brad and I had been invited to a party by the girl he was dating. I was going dressed as a dead construction worker, while Brad was dressed up in his Maverick from Top Gun costume. We both looked pretty dumb, as we hadn't put very much effort into our costumes. He was just excited about seeing the girl he had just started dating, and I was equally excited to meet and flirt with some new girls that night. Once we were both ready to go, we headed out. Brad's new girl had sent us a text with the address attached. We GPS'd it, and Brad drove us both to the party. It was about 30 miles away, on the outskirts of our city out in the country. We drove down a very long, dark street with no street lamps, and eventually made it to the house. The house was at the end of a long driveway. When we pulled up, we saw a good number of cars and trucks parked out front. I'd say there were about 20 or so. We were both pretty psyched, as this party looked to be quite awesome. Music was blaring from inside the house. The outside was lit up with black lights and decorated with all sorts of Halloween stuff. Red light was pouring out of the windows from inside. This place was a 2-story too, so it was very nice. It was surrounded by acres of farmland, and there was not another house in sight. When we went inside, we found Brad's girl sitting on a couch in the living room, talking to 2 of her friends. We sat down and Brad's girl said hello. She came over to us, sitting next to Brad. She was dressed up as a vampire. The 2 people she had been talking to were wearing masks. One of them was a guy, and the other was clearly a girl. The girl was wearing a ghost face mask, and the guy was wearing just a mask with normal clothes on. His mask was one of those black blank face masks. We all talked for a while, with people rushing around us, dancing and getting hammered. The guy was really quiet though. He only spoke whenever somebody else spoke to him. I honestly thought he was a little bit weird and creepy. It didn't seem like he was having a good time either. We assumed that the 2 of them had come together, but we found out that the ghost face girl had come with 2 other girls. The guy said he had come with one of his friends, but apparently he couldn't find him now. After a couple hours of talking, laughing, and drinking, my vision was starting to get blurry. I was getting pretty damn drunk. Brad and his girl had long since gotten off the couch and walked off somewhere. The other 2 were still talking to each other on the couch right next to me. They seemed to be flirting and having a lot of fun at this point. I was just kind of people watching, sipping on my 5th mixed drink of Jack and Coke. That was when I noticed the blank-faced guy kept leaning his head back. I'm pretty sure he was looking upstairs at the bedroom doors. I couldn't tell because with his mask I couldn't quite see his eyes. The ghost-faced girl didn't seem to notice this though. She was all over him, talking his ear off. At some point, I positioned one of the couch pillows behind my head and started to drift off to sleep. Going in and out of consciousness, I woke up for a moment completely and looked around the room. My head was spinning at this point. There were way less people walking around. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 3:45 a.m. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and leaned my head back on the pillow. I was going to get some sleep again. I started to close my eyes, but right before I did so, I noticed that blank face guy leading the ghost face girl up the stairs. Her head was down. She looked like she was barely awake. He was helping her walk up the steps and they disappeared into the bedroom. Next thing I knew, Brad was shaking me and telling me he wanted to leave. I asked if he was cool to drive, and he assured me he was. I got to my feet. The room was spinning. It felt like I was going to puke right there. I managed to make it outside though. The sun had just gone up when we made it back to Brad's house. We both collapsed on his couches and passed out. Hours later, I awoke to Brad's sister, waking him up and questioning him. She asked if we had gone to that party out in the country. When we said yes, she was completely frantic. She told us somebody had been killed there last night. I became completely awake upon hearing this, and so did Brad. I sat there silent. Brad was asking who it was and what had happened to them. His sister said she didn't know the girl's name yet, but she had been found murdered in an upstairs bedroom. She had been stabbed to death. I thought to myself, there's no way. Sure enough, to my disbelief, later on that day, they showed us the girl that was killed. It was that very same ghost-faced girl from that night. She had been stabbed 36 times. The police questioned everybody who was at the party on Halloween, including Brad and I. Of course, I told them immediately about that suspicious guy who had brought her upstairs. That he was wearing blue jeans, a black t-shirt, and a black blank face mask. To my knowledge, though, they never found that guy. The person who hosted the party said she'd never invited that guy, nor did she see him there. Call centers can be a weird place to work at. You talk to people from all over the country, and even sometimes all over the world. And even sometimes all over the world, most people are a little more, well, frustrating than anything. The same questions every single day will eventually drive you a little bit batty. I only wish those calls were the worst ones I've ever gotten though. I got the job as a customer service rep for a cable company just after I finished college. The hours really sucked too. 3 in the afternoon all the way until midnight. But the money was pretty good, and there were some medical benefits as well. It wasn't too great, but with loans to pay back, I took the first full-time job that came along. While some people need help with their cable after 10 p.m., there aren't that many of them, as you can imagine. 5 days a week, I was stuck at my desk taking calls from old men having trouble accessing skin flicks until midnight. Most of the night, though, was spent gossiping with another late-night employee. The calls never stopped for too long. It was the middle of spring when I got the first weird call. At first, this guy just sounded like your regular old confused customer, having trouble accessing some of the more mature channels. A little heavy breathing and a little stuttering, the usual. I was about to give him the usual spiel about turning off the parental locks when he cut me off. Have you ever wondered what human flesh tastes like? He muttered through these deep, excited breaths. Now that was far from the first prank I'd ever gotten. My immediate response was to hang up and mutter to my coworker about these annoying pricks on the other end. I shoved that memory of that call out of my head for a solid week or so. We got all manner of calls, so one stupid one wasn't enough to faze me. Late on a Friday night though, just before midnight or so, a familiar breath entered my ears as I picked up the line. Have you ever wondered what human flesh tastes like? He asked. I do all the... I ended the call before he could finish what he was saying. Just my luck to get this creep calling in a second time. I asked my coworker if he'd ever gotten a call like that before, but he only shrugged and said it wasn't anything that was normal. I hoped that not engaging with this creep would be enough to get him to give up. 2 times wasn't much to be concerned with anyway. By the 3rd call though, it was starting to get more personal. I hate how well I remember it. The weirdest thing about this 3rd call was how normal it started. It was a completely normal-sounding man on the other end, asking about our company and how long we'd been in business, what city the company was based out of, and the cost of our regular plans. It was nothing out of the ordinary. Then, though, he whispered into the phone line, I want to know what the flesh of a pretty young girl tastes like. My mind reeled as I ended the call as quickly as possible. For a prank caller, this guy was getting pretty tricky, and he was real dedicated too. I was almost starting to worry at that point, but then again, I didn't hear from him again for a while. I thought he must have given up the ghost or gotten bored or whatever. I didn't really care. I just wanted him to stop calling me. I wasn't going to be complaining when they did stop for an entire month. I was in the clear, and I even started to forget that strange caller and his creepy desires. I was over it, and had gone back to being generally annoyed by the other regular customers. I should have known better though. A call came in one night, at nearly 1:45 to midnight. It didn't even go to me though. My coworker, the only other person working at the time, picked up the call. Hey, he called to me. This guy on the line's asking for you? I told him to pass the call over to me and I'd handle it. It wasn't the first time someone had dealt with me previously and wanted to continue with the same representative. I didn't really think anything of it. Hello, how can I help you this evening? I mindlessly asked into the phone. I want to know what your flesh tastes like. The familiar voice breathed in my ear. I want to savor it on my tongue. Leave me alone, I screamed into the phone. To my horror, the phantom voice laughed at my fury. He laughed and laughed until I ripped the headset off my head and stormed away from my miniature cubicle, tapping my finger hard against the end call button as I left. Maybe it was because he'd finally gotten a reaction out of me, or maybe because he was getting worse, but the calls ramped up to at least once a day now. I did everything I could to get him to leave me alone after that. I told my supervisors, I switched my shifts at the company, I even called the police. Somehow, they were unable to trace the call. At least they tried though. The mystery caller kept calling 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times a day now, each time telling me how much he desired to taste human flesh, often mentioning my flesh in particular. He mentioned other people he wanted to eat too, but it was always that he wanted to eat another human being. After a month of that, I quit. No 2 weeks notice, no offers to try and stick it out. I went to sit down at my desk one morning and realized I just couldn't bring myself to put my headset on. I couldn't handle this anymore. I got up and went to my boss and told him I was done. To my surprise, no one really judged me for it either. I probably stuck it out longer than they expected. I left with a glowing letter of recommendation and mumbled words of apology that they couldn't do more for me. I spent a lot of time hiding out in my bedroom after I left the call center. After a couple of weeks without getting any weird phone calls or having to talk to anyone really, I started to go out again. Life started getting back to normal and I stopped thinking about that weird caller. While I hadn't forgotten about the terrible calls, I was able to push them out of my head for the most part. I even lined up a job interview that I was supposed to go to yesterday. The job was nothing special, but it was a huge step for me. I was all set to go for that interview. My suit was ironed, my hair was all styled. I felt better than I had in months. I even found myself smiling while I was waiting for the bus to come pick me up. That's when I heard it. Somebody leaned in and whispered in my ear as their breath washed over me. I know what the flesh tastes like now. I like it. I spun around hard as panic came over me, my eyes scanning the group of people moving toward the bus, but no one stood out from the crowd in particular. My mysterious caller had somehow found me in real life. Worse, it seemed he'd gone through with his sick, twisted fantasy. I didn't get on the bus. How could I? That guy was on there, and he knew who I was. But I didn't know him. I skipped my interview and went right back to my bedroom. At least it was safe in there. Now though, my cell phone always keeps ringing non-stop. I don't answer it if I don't know the number, no matter how long it rings for. It's just safer to let it ring away. This incident happened about 7 or 8 months ago. I was the night shift desk clerk at a hotel, and let's just say there are a steady stream of creepers that pass through the lobby. I've had a ton of uncomfortable situations throughout my 3 years of employment there, but there was one particular guy that terrified me. It was around 2 a.m. or so when the guy walked into the lobby. The first thing I noticed was that he smelled god-awful, like burning plastic or something. I shrugged it off though, because at the time there were a lot of contractors that were in the area working at a chemical plant nearby. I just assumed he was one of those workers looking for a quick nap or a hot breakfast. The morning came by and my shift ended. Fast forward to my next shift the following night. The smelly man from the night before had left all of his belongings in his room and was now nowhere to be found. He'd only paid for a single night, so the housekeepers had to move all his things to the storage room so they could prepare the room for the next guest. Around 8:30 p.m. or so, I get a call from a police officer. Apparently, this guy was a wanted fugitive because he'd nearly beat his wife to death just 2 hours before he checked in. I informed them of the items he'd left in the hotel room. I get the whole "do not engage, he's a dangerous and violent offender" speech, and now I was really scared. They said it was highly unlikely he would come back, but to excuse myself politely and call them if he did show up. Well, needless to say, he ended up back in the lobby not even 20 minutes later. He demanded the luggage he'd left behind. At this point, I'm doing whatever it takes not to show fear, because now I'm fully aware of what this fucker is capable of doing. I tried to play it off like I didn't know where his things were, so I could make an excuse to go upstairs and call the police. I'm not too sure where they are. Let me go take a peek in a few of the storage units upstairs. If you could just wait here in the lobby, I'll be just a moment. He didn't say a word, so I assumed he was fine with that. As I started walking up the stairs though, about halfway up I realized he was following behind me. It was at this moment I started to flip out internally. I had no idea what to do. I began to fake search through a few different closets. After about 10 minutes of this, he started to get very hostile. Where is my shit? I need my things right now! He slammed his fist through a wall to make his point. There was now enough distance between us though, that I felt comfortable making a run for it. I fumbled with my master card and managed to lock myself in the closest vacant room. He banged on the door for a while, but left a short time later. The cops came about 20 minutes after this, but he was already long gone. Of course, they searched through his bags, only to find a stash of meth and drug paraphernalia. That explains the awful scent and his determination to follow my every step. I quit shortly after, and I'm still unsure if they ever actually found him.